Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So, most leaders today would say they have strong teams, smart people, experienced professionals, and lots of talent around the table. And yet, something curious often happens. Despite all that capability, performance can still feel uneven. Projects are unstructured and eventually stall. Alignment takes longer than expected, and decisions take multiple rounds. And we've seen this pattern across industries, not just one, across sectors, domains, whether it be manufacturing, energy, pharma, automotive, FMCG, hospitality, IT. And leaders always come back to us with one simple question. Why is the team moving so slow? Good teams somehow don't always move as fast as they should, contrary to the belief. Today, we're going to unpack why that happens. Our theme is why strong teams still underperform, the hidden friction leaders miss. Joining us is Krish, who works closely with the leadership teams on understanding the thinking and behavioral patterns that shape how teams collaborate and perform. Krish, great to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Ravala. That's an amazing introduction to the topic. It's a complex topic, you're right. Um, in partially in answer to your question, I would argue that talent doesn't drive performance because leadership is in a strange position, right? The people in the room are not committing on behalf of themselves, they are committing on behalf of their teams. So performance eventually becomes an alignment between what I agreed in the room and what I do, what I execute outside the room, not just me alone, but with my teams, right? And you're right, that pattern, that alignment, that degree of correlation is very low. And why is it very low? Take a further step back. Often the leadership teams are not yet teams. They are a group of very talented, very smart individuals who have roles that are aligned and they themselves know each other mostly through their roles. What does this mean? If I speak of leaders doing 3 Ds, right? They deliberate, they debate, they decide, right? There is surprisingly very little transparency around what are you deliberating. I said something and you paused and you thought, what are you thinking? How are you prioritizing what I'm thinking? How important is it for you? All those are not visible. Like there's no HUD readout on our face on what we are actually thinking, right? Um, on the subject of debate, the way you debate, the way I debate can be very, very different and is very, very different. Some of us would like to do it offline. Some of us would like to do it one-to-one. Some of us would like to grandstand and do it right there in the room. And then comes decision making. Surprisingly, for some of us, decisions are not ever done. Everything is up for negotiation. New facts can still make me change my mind. And for some of us, what's done is done. What's a handshake is a handshake. So if this is how the human beings who sit in those chairs vary amongst themselves, yes, there is going to be a difference between what the leadership team intends to do and what actually gets done. Without assuming anyone's genuinely wanting to sabotage any of it. Everyone wants to do it and they are doing their best job possible. They're tightly knit by values. And yet, there is a variance between what I said and what you thought I said. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Absolutely. So, for leaders listening today, I mean, what are the early signals or signs that this might be happening inside their team?
Great point. I would start with something I said, right? There is a fair bit of divergence between what we agreed with and what got done. That's your earliest warning signal, right? On the assumption that no one intends to break something that's been agreed with and negotiated and agreed with. If there's a gap between that execution and what we agreed, then that's worth looking into. So that's one place I would definitely go to. The second part is the first conversations subsequent to a large decision making. You finish making a decision, and subsequently you meet them at one-to-ones, you meet them in both informal and formal conversations, and you find recollection or priorities are entirely different. Priorities are a great place to start. Are your 1, 2, 3 and my 1, 2, 3 the same? Are they both 1, 2, and 3, or is my 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1? That's a great place to go to. Um, There's one more thing which probably subtle, but it happens in course of time for a team that's been working for some time. As your leadership team start forming subgroups, are X and Y leaders more comfortable with A and B leaders than with the whole group? Is more agreement, alignment happening before that meeting than after that meeting? Right? But of all of these, my favorite, Ramala, is, do your minus ones collectively agree with what you guys did? Are they able to understand the thought process that went into whatever you did? Or do your minus ones can always believe that every time these leaders sit together, they're going to come back with another left turn or a right turn, and we have to start again, right? Because that minus one's understanding what happened in the room comes out of what the people in the room communicated to them, which brings us back to, are we all singing from the same page?
Right.
Fair?
Makes complete sense. And I think a lot of times it's the latter, where the minus one agree or do not. So it makes complete sense. So like what kind of patterns show up even in teams with very capable, people? How do leaders navigate or, find these patterns so they can, figure out a plan for it?
So even before the how, let me go one step further, right? Why does this happen? Part of why it happens is probably because we are humans, we are different. And one of the beauty of being a human being is the way I think and the way way I share my thinking is all different, right? 7 billion of us probably do it all in our own ways, right? It's it's not pigeonholable, at least not at the level of stereotypes. You can't say, oh, that person is this person is this. And like I said, we don't have an HUD display telling you exactly what I'm thinking and how am I saying what I'm saying, right? And then comes friction. So the one part is parsing what I thought and said, and then how does that gel with how you think and how you say it, right? So between the fact that I think differently, I process differently, I look for different information, I share different information, my priorities are fundamentally inherently different, and the way I share it with you is also deeply personalized to who I am. Some part of it is baked into how I think. My DNA, my genes are propelling me in a particular direction, and then my um, learned practices, right? Uh, Between the two of them, I'm going to present a certain Krish to you. Now, how does that Krish engage with Ramala? How do Ramala and Krish get along? Because Ramala has her own version of the Ramala that speaks in that context, right? Um, that's why, even though we both are equally capable, equally committed to what we need to get done, it doesn't happen. As you can guess, leadership in general tries to get past this by having structures, right? By having rules. We will always have agenda. We'll always have pre-reads. We'll always make sure there is some discussion before we go forward. Let's do a survey and what people think and bring up what people think about, right? Let's Some decisions have to be unanimous, some don't. We create all these rules to try and buffer us from all these variances that we have amongst themselves. But structures only take you so far. They take you only so far because, in again, fundamentally, if Krish doesn't get what Ramala is saying and Ramala doesn't get what Krish is saying, and when I say doesn't get, it's not a communication problem, right? If I'm not able to understand where you're coming from, why your words are completely orthogonal to what I said, if I cannot parse that, then we are both nodding our heads to completely different things. So
Makes sense.
that's a bit of the why sitting over there. Uh, the how gets a little more messy, but the best place, obviously, to start with is my awareness of my own preferences, my own predilections. What would I rather do? What do I end up doing? And very important, what do I end up doing when the stakes are high? Because usually, when the stakes are high, is when we get into default mode. That's when uh, who I wanted to be kind of goes out the window and I become who I am, right? So,
Your natural self comes into state.
yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, I really, the word friction actually resonated a lot. And I think this is a long-standing problem in the industry in general. So, when friction or differences are so common, why do leaders often miss them? Or, you know?
Um, I know it's fashionable to blame everything on AI. This is something that predates AI. This is not about AI. It's just that we have been on this execution drill from what I think mid 70s, mid 80s, when it's not just about execution, but execution quickly, quick execution, quick everything uh, has become how knowledge workers work has got industrialized, right? There's different kinds of work we're talking about, but knowledge workers, people who are not actually sitting and making stuff, our work got industrialized at the point when throughput time, turnaround time became important measures. Right? Now, the moment I ask for speed, I'm not asking for speed in decision making. I'm asking for speed in execution, which means anything which is not execution is a waste of time. Under that cloak, it's easy to miss these nuances, right? Uh, Decisions get made because of the people who speak up, right? Decisions get made because someone has an idea, and I waited for 1001, 1002, 1003. That's the idea we'll go with, right? So the fastest idea gets voted upon. The fastest person to speak gets to hold on to the mic. The most articulate person is often mistaken, or their idea is often mistaken for the only idea on the table, right? So I think the context in which leadership is doing leadership often helps us miss the bus. That's one problem. The other problem is we like people like others, right? So the kind of leader who thrives in that environment and grows to be a leader ends up either hiring or associating. I'm differentiating the two because many of the leadership teams I run into, the leader did not hire their minus ones, right? They're all CXOs over there. The CEO didn't hire the minus ones. They inherited them, or they have been assigned them. One of the two things have happened. So you don't necessarily pick your subordinates, but you do tend to associate with people that you like across your 360, right? So that's the second problem. You tend to start getting to be an echo chamber. So that's another reason to miss the fact that I've not heard from X, not because X doesn't have an idea, because X processes it differently. And if I give X a few more minutes or a different context, X is going to share something worth it, right? So the second problem. Third problem is um, we assume that when we understand, we also act. Let me unpack that a little bit. Uh, I understand that, let's say I'm not a data friendly person, right? I get the fact I'm not a data friendly person. So when I look at a spreadsheet full of numbers, I look at it and I say, I know I'm not a data friendly person, but I'm a leader. I've looked at the numbers and I think I get them. And that's good enough for me to make a decision, right? So I've substituted my understanding that I have a gap with the fact that if I've understood I've got the gap, I've probably compensated for it. That's not how the brain works, right? At which point now believe I've covered everything that I need to cover, in this case quantitatively, so I'm good to go. The same thought could have been about my understanding people. I look at the situation and I say, okay, A is like this, B is like that. You know what? Let's forget A and B being this like this and like that. We need to do this. So go ahead and do this. So these mental heuristics, these shortcuts that our brain takes, the problem, right? So between the fact that it's all about speed, between the fact that I associate with people who are like me, and between the fact that I underestimate my own um, need for information packed in a certain way, man, it's surprising that we catch it when we do. Forget how do leaders miss it.
Makes sense. I mean, so in a nutshell, awareness, being aware of the gap is not the solution to the gap.
Yep, I agree. And that's a very human thing, right? If I understand something, I assume I can do it. It's like watching a cooking show and say I can cook better. It doesn't quite work that way.
We all do that, I think. All right, makes sense. I mean, so how does this? I understand there is a friction, right? And there is a reason why the friction exists, maybe conscious, unconscious biases. And so now it exists, it is real. So, how does this hidden friction first? We'll get to the solution in a bit, but how does this affect performance over time? Like you said, the leader thinks they understand the data, but maybe he does not. So this does have repercussions in the long time. So how does this hidden friction affect performance over time?
I in our work, I see quite a few things, and typically the kind of cases that we consult on uh, is exactly what you started off with, Ramala, where a leader says, "Well, we're all competent, good people. How the hell does this stuff keep happening?" Right? Um, Adults have two problems. They You can call them skills, but in this context, I'm calling them problems. Adults adapt. Adults assume. Adults adapt. That means friction increases. I see more and more that what I'm saying is not landing with my boss. My boss doesn't get it, right? I adapt to it and I say, okay, my boss is not going to get it. Let me contract what I'm saying. Let me tweak what I'm saying. Let me change what I'm saying. Let me not say it in the first place. So I keep adapting, which means that the throughput of information drops as a matter of fact, right? Because I'm compensating for the fact that this relation is what it is, right? I picked a subordinate and a boss. It could definitely work the other way around too, right? As a leader, when I come into a role new, I'm full of positivism and I think I can change everyone and get everyone where they need to be. And next month after that, I'm saying, oh, no, these guys are not going to make it. Let me pick these few people who will make it. Right? So I do that, right? So we adapt, and that's one problem. The other problem is we assume. We assume that we have said it, that it's got understood. We assume that a yes means a yes. We assume that when you said yes, your whole organization said yes with you. So when we make those assumptions, that again causes friction. And the nature of the friction then becomes, we agreed in January that we're going to do something. We are in June and nothing's moved. And we all have very good reasons why it's not moved, but guess what? This is where we are. So the visible friction happens with work not getting done. Work not getting done in the form and shape in which it to be done. I said 3Ds, let me pick 3Es, right? I'm looking for execution, I'm looking for excellence, I'm looking for effectiveness. Or I need all three, right? Execution, I need something done. Excellence, I need it done well. Effectiveness, I need impact. I need it done well enough to have delivered an impact, right? And any of these three can be a challenge between what the leadership decided in the room and what happened outside, right? I think the bigger way in this friction turns up again is where the minus ones start seeing that the leadership team is not a team. They retreat into their silos. They realize that I should be aligned with my boss's best friends, or I should be aligned with my boss's most adjacent functions or the functions that they're most comfortable with. So the minus ones start imitating the behavior of the leadership team. And if I'm, say, an HR leader, I start seeing that my succession plans don't go anywhere. I start realizing that in a performance conversation, leadership together are not able to identify 3, 4, 5 people who can take up their roles because they don't know each other's best successors. Right? Last comment, again, friction turns up in a way that your stakeholders can see. So even before this leadership team sees it, there are stakeholders in the rest of the system who are saying, yeah, you guys say a lot, but we don't get much done. Alternatively, you guys seem to be busy all the time and nothing strategic gets done, right? But leaders have stakeholders have some space to give them the semblance of objectivity. And so that's feedback that comes from that direction, right? I think the biggest friction, and I think this hits all the leaders I speak with, is the fact that they are unable to leave the legacy they wanted to leave behind, right? So again, as HR leaders, as a business leader, I'm not able to leave the legacy I wanted. And as an HR leader, when I see this environment, I again see the friction. I see the fact that on the one hand, that I've become pockets, I've become groups, right? And at this point, I'm not sure whether it's doable for me to fix this group or shuffle and see what happens, right? I'm making it sound very doom and gloom. It's not very doom and gloom, right? Friction is not all bad. Often what looks like disagreement and conflict, it's just different thinking styles colliding. That's all there is to it. But if left unchecked,
Makes sense. I mean, I really like the point that you made that when a minus one tries to imitate a leader, let's say I do not have a data preference, but because my leader has one, I try to fit into that box because at the end of the day, he or she notices my work. So that means I'm not being true to myself. So maybe my performance stays even for 3 months. And how long can you have a facade? After a point, it does crumble. So maybe that's why what is a high performance team does. I mean, just to summarize what I have understood from the point that you've made. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
I would put one tweak there, right? I don't think stretching ourselves is a facade so long as we are not making it our identity. So, in your example, you are leaning into looking at data that you would have not otherwise looked at. If in your conversations with your leader say, that is noticed, and the leader says, good job, you are talking my language, and you say, man, it's an effort to talk your language, but I'm making the effort. So long as you put it on the table, it's not a facade, it's not a false front you're putting,
true.
number one. Number two, so long as the leader understands the implications of you stretching in that direction and figuring out, okay, so what would make it less of a stretch, right? uh, Suddenly it's become something more positive, right? The reason I'm calling that out is, of all the diversities, cognitive diversity is invisible. Every other diversity, if I'm not wrong, is probably visible, right? Perhaps not experience, perhaps not academic qualifications, but cognitive diversity is definitely invisible. And we have to have a vocabulary to be able to talk to each other about, this is how I think and how do you think. Preferably a language that is not adversarial. It's a language that's not labeling, but I need to be able to say, this is my preference and that's your preference. And it looks like right now you're leaning into your preference. Can you lean into mine, right? We need to be able to have some conversations like that. So
Makes
yeah,
sense.
not necessarily a, a put on figure.
Makes sense. I mean, absolutely. I agree completely. So I mean, for the audience, for the leaders that are listening today, and they do recognize this pattern, and like I said, we'll get to the solution. So, and they want to explore the greater depth of this. Where should they start, or what is the solution to this?
Um, Two, three parts to it, right? As a leader, sitting by myself in my cabin, I think the best place to start, and I've been there before, is start telling people why you're thinking what you're thinking and
Okay.
ask them why are you saying what you're saying, right?
Okay.
That's a great place to start. Basically, I'm making my thinking thought process transparent, right? So that's one place to start. The second place, which comes closely with it, is get comfortable with your discomfort, right? I might be a person who doesn't speak much, and I might be the kind of leader who would always say, "You go first," right? Maybe there's a good opportunity for you to start displaying your thinking, even if that's uncomfortable to you, and tell the others, "This is uncomfortable for me, but I'm doing it so that you understand where I'm coming from, and I need to know where you're coming from." So put more on the table. That's one part of it. Um, get comfortable with the fact that friction is not bad. Friction is productive. Uh, it's productive when we can appreciate how people think and talk, when we can accept how people think and talk, and that's thinking and talking differently from where I am coming from. So lean into the friction, lean into the discomfort, lean into the conflict, and try and understand where it's coming from. Right? I was in this conversation with a bunch of leaders, and they were going hammer and tongs against each other's ideas, right, ripping them apart, and then finishing off with saying, "All right, so that idea withstood all that torture. Let's go." Right? You got to make conflict healthy, and that's a lovely place, lovely environment to be, where I can disagree with your ideas without any discomfort that I'm about disagreeing with Ramala. I'm disagreeing with Ramala's ideas, so that makes life so much more easier, right? I can be myself so much more easier. um, One of the things that we are doing as Marg, as you know, is we're shortly having that 90-minute session where we're just talking about uh, how will how could leaders lean into this in a way that's far more effective. What does it mean to have this understanding of preferences? What does it mean to influence communication? So we're going to do that, right? So the first comment I made was, if you're sitting by yourself and you want to do one thing today, lean into that. We are there to help. Right? The second comment I would make. Third comment I would make is, I think as leadership teams, the focus on execution is paramount. I don't disagree with that. but it needs to be balanced with a focus on how good are we as a leadership team. And I have enjoyed setting up leadership teams, and as a leader myself, asking myself the tough question: as a leadership team, how good are we? And that comes back to my minus ones, and it comes back to my stakeholders. Do they see us as a team that thinks effectively together? And thinking effectively together is not thinking the same thing, but we're able to take the thinking and do something with it. Right? So go there. Go there to ask yourself, are you where you need to be? And is there something you want to tweak? Was that too much? Does that make
No,
sense?
it makes sense. Absolutely. I mean, I do. I mean, in an ideal world, like you said, there would be no friction, but we have to figure out how to make friction productive. Understood. We'll take up questions. There is an interesting question based on friction itself. What symptoms should we look for early signals of friction?
Look for disagreement outside the room instead of inside the room.
Okay.
That's a good place to start, right? I would say the second thing is look at how much your N-1s feel the need to prepare to present something to your leadership team. If your N-1s feel that leadership teams are easily accessible, that I can go to the group and get something done, that's good news, right? So that's the second place you can go to. I would go to horizontal corporate functions. I would go to your chief of staff. I would go to your chief operating officer. I'd go to HR. I would go to PMO heads. All those, I'd go to any of the corporate functions that have a horizontal role and ask them, how effective are we as a leadership team? Is there high friction? I would say high friction or low friction. Friction is good. I'll say, is there effective friction or ineffective friction? Because they are in horizontal roles, they get to see all the leaders across all conversations. They can give you insights. So those three things I would do.
Makes sense. All right, I think that's it. We'll wrap up the discussion.
Thank you, Ravila.
Thank
Have a
you,
great day.
Krish.